Hey everyone, welcome back to HFI Covenant. My name is Jennifer and I'll be narrating today's story. This is a completely original human-written work of science fiction. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's jump right in. The vault doors sealed with the sound of a world ending. It was a resonant, bone-deep clang, a perfect metallic note that rang up through the silver walls of the high sanctum and died somewhere in the vaulted ceiling 30 meters above. Queen Larina of the Siderian Empire had heard that sound 100 times in ceremony and 3 times in crisis. She had never heard it from the inside. She stood at the center of the ritual dais, unarmored. This was the vulnerability of the polishing hour. Every 40 cycles, her outer shoulder plating was removed for lapping and resealing, a tradition as old as the spire itself. Her left shoulder was bare to the structural lattice, matte silver beneath the ambient glow of the sanctum's amber sconces. Her attendants had gone. She had sent them away, as protocol demanded. A queen's lattice was not for common eyes. Commander Varric, her voice rang out in that way all Siderian speech did. Crystalline, pitched at the harmonic frequency of struck metal, layered with the quiet authority of a sovereign who had never once needed to shout. The 12 shapes that had stepped from the shadows of the chamber's perimeter did not answer. They did not need to. Their cobalt blue armor caught the amber light and drank it, the integrated plating sealed tight, glass steel blades already drawn. Larina processed the geometry of the room in the time it took a human heart to beat once. 12. Arranged at calculated intervals, blade-to-blade coverage of every exit arc. The vault sealed. Her armor on a stand 8 meters behind her, which may as well have been 8 kilometers. She was fast. She was not 12 guards with drawn blades fast. Commander Varric stepped forward from the center-left position, which told her he had anticipated her reflex to move right. Dull chrome skin, seamed with old weld scars across his cheek and left forearm. The marks of a warrior who had been cracked and repaired so many times that the repairs had become part of his architecture. His amber eyes carried no uncertainty, no guilt, just the flat operational calm of a Siderian who had already committed the decision irrevocably to his processing lattice. "Your Grace," his voice was a low-struck bell, hollow in the center. "The Empire requires transition." "Transition," she repeated. The word tasted like copper shavings in her mouth. "Your reign has been architecturally sound. We note this without sentiment. However, the Mercury Accord fractures progress. Your sister's proposal provides more efficient resolution. The High Council concurs." Larina felt the first real cold settle into her chest. Not the ambient coolness of the sanctum, but the internal drop, the mercury in her system slowing as threat response flooded her lattice. Vala, her sister, who smiled with her whole face and wept at chamber music and had lobbied 3 times in the last cycle for expanded human labor contracts. Vala, who had apparently been busy. "You were sworn to me," Larina said. "We were sworn to the Empire." Varric raised his blade. "We are still sworn to the Empire." They moved. Larina was fast. She crossed half the distance to her armor before the first guard reached her, and she fought bare-handed in the way that a Siderian queen fights, precisely, economically, targeting stress fractures in her opponent's plating with the heel of her palm. She cracked the first guard's elbow joint. She dislocated the second's knee. She was good. She was outnumbered 11-1, with no armor on her left side. And it took Commander Varric's second swing, not the first. She felt a grim pride about that, to find her exposed shoulder. The impact was catastrophic. She heard the fracture before she felt it. A sharp, singing crack that traveled up her lattice like a lightning bolt finding a path. Her left shoulder plate splintered along the primary stress line, and the pain arrived exactly as Siderian structural pain always did. Clinical, bright, and absolute. Not anguish. Damage reporting. Her arm stopped responding below the elbow. She hit the dais floor on her knees and held herself there, by will alone. Varric stood over her. He raised the blade for the killing blow, aimed, she noted with detached professionalism, precisely at the T3 vertebral junction in her neck, which would cleanly separate her processing lattice from her motor systems. Efficient. She had always despised efficiency in her enemies. She looked up at him. She did not close her eyes. Siderian queens did not close their eyes. That was when the ceiling screamed. The maintenance grate above Dais 4 gave way with the specific shriek of bolts that had been loosened deliberately, from the inside, by someone who knew exactly which 4 fasteners to remove without triggering the structural tension sensors. The body that dropped through the gap was not what the Cobalt Guard expected. It was not armored. It was not chrome-skinned or lattice-hardened or elegant in any of the ways the spire rewarded. It was a human male in grease-stained blue coveralls, a janitor unremarkable and broad-shouldered, falling the full 4 meters from the duct mouth with a tank strapped to his back and a heavy industrial wrench in his left hand. He hit the polished dais floor in a controlled drop, knees bent, weight distributed, one hand catching himself without breaking stride, and came up in the dead center of the Cobalt Guard's 12-point formation. 12 blades swung toward him. Milo Myers, Senior Sanitation and Maintenance Technician Level 4 of the Siderian High Spire, did not fight like a soldier. He fought like a man who had spent 11 years crawling through the infrastructure of a building designed by beings who considered human biology a maintenance inconvenience, and who had therefore developed a very particular understanding of what broke things. The thermal wash wand was already in his right hand. He hit the activation toggle before his knees fully straightened. The cryo side of the industrial thermal washer ran at negative 196 degrees Celsius, which was over 100 degrees below the brittleness threshold of Siderian cobalt lattice alloy, a fact that was not listed in any combat manual because it had never occurred to anyone that a maintenance worker might need it. Milo had calculated it 3 weeks ago, sitting in Subduct 7 eating a cold sandwich, after overhearing something through the plumbing that he very urgently wished he had not. The first guard's left knee joint took a 1-second direct burst. Milo watched the alloy go dull at the seams, the thermal shock crystallizing the lattice microstructure in real time. The way water becomes ice so fast, it doesn't have time to arrange itself properly, and so it arranges itself wrong. He swung the hammer wrench at the joint before the guard could compensate for the temperature change, and the knee shattered at the stress line exactly where the physics said it would. The guard fell. Milo was already turning. Guard 2 came in fast and high, blade angled for his neck in the economical Siderian fighting style that had no wasted motion because Siderian warriors had no adrenaline, no rage, no impulse to telegraph with their bodies. Pure geometry. Milo ducked below the swing, not because he had calculated the arc, but because his body had done it before his brain caught up, the way it always did when the threat was close enough to smell, and hit the cryo stream into the guard's extended wrist. The glass steel blade dropped from fingers that had suddenly forgotten how to grip. The hammer wrench came up into the elbow fractured along the pre-chilled seam. 2 down, both crumpled in pools of their own heavy mercury, which spread across the dais floor in slow, gleaming rivers. 10 guards remaining. Varric had not yet moved. He was watching with those flat amber eyes, recalculating. Milo used the 1 second this bought him to look at the queen. She was on her knees on the dais, left shoulder cracked open, arm non-functional, silver lattice fractured along a line that ran from the shoulder joint to just below the collarbone. Her amber eyes were fixed on him with an expression he couldn't fully read. Siderians weren't always legible to him, even after 11 years, but there was something behind the damage assessment in her gaze that he would think about later, in quieter moments, when he had time for things like thinking. She was alive. She was looking at him like she'd never seen a human before. "Your Grace," he said, and his voice came out steadier than he felt, which was something he was quietly grateful for. "I'm going to need you to move when I tell you to move." Her eyes narrowed fractionally. "You're the maintenance worker, Milo Myers, Level 4. I know this isn't the introduction either of us would have preferred." He was already repositioning, pulling the cryo wand back toward his body, scanning the guard formation. But the short version is, I know how to kill all of them. I have enough cryo charge for about 9 more sustained bursts, and one of us has a functional arm. You'll want to be standing when we leave, Varric said very quietly. "Kill him." 8 guards moved simultaneously. Milo ran, not away, toward the left flank of the formation, the gap between guards 3 and 4 that the commander's kill order had created when guards 7 through 10 shifted their positioning to close off the exits. Milo had been watching those small geometric failures for 30 seconds. They added up. The dais floor was sealed with a compound called Vitreous 7, which the spire used on all ceremonial surfaces because it polished to a mirror finish and resisted mercury staining. It was, Milo knew from the 12 times he'd had to reseal portions of it, also extremely slick under any kind of moisture introduction. He hit the spray valve on the wand's secondary nozzle, the industrial solvent side, which was not designed as a weapon, and laid down a fan of it across the floor between himself and the 3 guards rushing him from the right. The first guard's foot hit the slick patch, and the Siderian's own high-density mass did the rest. 400 kilograms of metallic humanoid in integrated armor, moving at combat speed, encountering a frictionless surface. The physics were not complicated. The guard went down hard, the impact resonating through the dais with a crash like a dropped bell. And Milo was already stepping onto the guard's back and using the elevated position to get a clean cryoburst into the neck joint of Guard 5, who had been perfectly positioned for it, if you happened to be standing on the downed Guard 3's shoulder plating. Guard 5's neck joints frosted. Milo hit them with the wrench. The resonant crack of fracturing alloy was becoming familiar to him, and he did not examine how he felt about that. 3 down from this engagement, 5 total. He kept moving because stopping was death. The 3 guards from the right flank had compensated for the solvent slick. Slower now, stepping around it. Guard 6 came at him from the front with the blade low and angled. A sweep designed to catch his legs and take him down where Siderian weight advantage would end the fight instantly. Milo vaulted the blade using the nearest guard's arm as a step, landed behind the guard, and spent 2 seconds he arguably didn't have jamming the cryo wand against the base of the skull at the Atlas joint, the T1 transition zone, which was where Siderian neck anatomy funneled the most structural stress. The cryo burst held for 3 seconds. The guard seized, lattice contracting around the frosted joint, and dropped like a statue pushed off a plinth. 4 down from this engagement, 6 total, 6 remaining. Milo was bleeding from a shallow cut on his cheekbone, where a guard's elbow had caught him during the scramble. He hadn't even registered the impact until the warmth reached his jaw, and he wiped it with the back of his hand without slowing. Behind him, he heard the queen rising from the dais. The sound of her was different from the guards, lighter, more deliberate, the footfall of someone recalibrating around a damaged limb. Commander Varric had still not personally engaged. He was directing the remaining 6 guards in precise formations, redistributing their positioning to account for the solvent patch, and Milo's apparent tendency to use the guards' own positions against them. Varric was smart. He'd done this before. Milo hadn't killed 12 of anything before. He'd killed 6 now. He didn't bother with the professional fastidiousness of calling it disabling. The shattered lattices and leaked mercury meant they were never coming back online. Milo! The queen's voice, low and resonant, directly behind his left shoulder, close. Her arm was still non-functional, but she'd clearly assessed the room while he was engaged. The maintenance shaft access, panel H7, behind the secondary altar column. He didn't ask how she knew that. Queens of Places probably knew where all the exits were. Can you run? He asked. A pause. I am insulted by the question. Right, he said. On 3, 2, 1. He hit the last of the solvent spray in a wide arc across the remaining 6 guards' approach corridor, bought them exactly 4 seconds of disrupted pursuit, and ran for the altar column with the Siderian queen at his side, moving fast and precise, and not at all like someone with a cracked shoulder joint. And Milo thought, with the frantic clarity of a man actively being chased, that she was one of the most controlled things he had ever seen in his life. Behind them, Varric's voice cut through the chamber, resonant and cold as struck iron. Seal the sublevels, collapse the marrow access. Milo hit the panel release on H7 and shoved the queen through first. The marrow was what the maintenance crew called the network of service tunnels that ran through the spire's lower third, like the skeletal structure of a living thing. It was not a metaphor the Siderians had chosen. They called it Sub-Infrastructure Corridor System 1 through 47. And the maintenance crew had renamed it collectively, because spending 11 hours in a tunnel system requires giving it something you can curse at affectionately. Milo had spent more time in the marrow than he had in his assigned quarters over the last 4 years. He knew where it breathed and where it pinched. He knew which junctions ran hot and which ran cold. He knew that the industrial heat exchangers on sublevel 3 generated a constant ambient temperature of 62 degrees Celsius, which was above the operational tolerance for Siderian metallic lattice, and that the access corridors to those exchangers were exactly 41 centimeters wide. He knew that because he'd measured them, once, in the way that a maintenance worker measures things, not because they planned to flee through them with an injured queen, but because narrow, hot corridors were the kind of thing that could kill you if you went in unprepared. And Milo had a professional relationship with not dying that predated his current situation by several decades. The queen did not complain about the heat. She processed it, visibly. He could see the slight tension in the muscles of her jaw, the way her amber eyes tracked the temperature readout on the tunnel's monitoring panel, calculating. Her shoulder was bad. The cracked plate had spread slightly during their run, and in the amber service lighting of the corridor, she could see the fracture line clearly. A dark seam running from the joint like a fault line in polished stone. "I need to carry you," Milo said. Her head turned toward him with a precision that was almost mechanical. "You will not because I want to. Because the next junction is a 60-centimeter pipe crawl and it goes downslope. If you favor your left side on the angle, you'll hit the joint against the pipe wall and extend the fracture. I've seen it happen to maintenance guys with regular injuries. Yours is worse." He paused. "Your Grace." The title felt strange in his mouth in this context. Crouched in a maintenance tunnel with the sound of pursuit still echoing somewhere behind the sealed panel. But she was still the queen. That hadn't changed because the world had gone sideways. She studied him for a moment with those unpupilled amber eyes. Then, with the deliberate motion of someone making a tactical decision rather than a concession, "Proceed." He lifted her. The first thing he registered was the weight. Siderian biology was dense, the metallic lattice of their bodies carrying mass that their lean frames didn't visually suggest, and Lorena was roughly 30% heavier than a human woman her size would have been. But Milo had spent 11 years carrying industrial equipment through the marrow, and the kind of muscle you built doing that was the useful kind, the kind that didn't care about aesthetics and only cared about load distribution. He adjusted her against his chest, her undamaged right side toward him, her fractured left carefully outward, and moved. She was rigid in his arms, not struggling. She'd made the tactical decision and was executing it, but not soft either. Everything about her was precise, controlled, held to an architecture of self-possession that clearly didn't have a variable for being carried by a maintenance worker through a hot pipe. "The tunnel diverts at junction 9, she said, her voice still that crystalline resonance, even in the cramped heat of the marrow. "If they seal the marrow access from the main level, we have 17 minutes before the secondary lockdown engages." 12, Milo said. "The secondary lockdown has a mechanical lag on sub-level 5, but not on 6, and we're heading towards 6. Maintenance filed a repair request 8 months ago, never got processed." A pause. "You filed a repair request 3 times. The Council's infrastructure liaison said the marrow systems were low priority." He navigated the downslope junction smoothly, keeping her shoulder level. Turns out they were wrong about that. He heard something that was almost not there, the faintest resonance in her chest. Like a crystal glass struck softly, he thought, startled, that it might have been a laugh. They rested in the alcove at junction 12, which was deeper in the marrow than the guards would risk, and hotter than they could tolerate. Milo set her down carefully on the pipe housing, checked the temperature gauge on the wall, 67 Celsius, and stripped off the outer layer of his coveralls to his undershirt, with the efficient practicality of a man managing his core temperature before it became a problem. Queen Lorena watched him do this. She was cataloging. He understood in the abstract that Siderians observed humans the way humans observed interesting machinery, with an analytical attention that was not quite respect and not quite dismissal, but a sort of clinical fascination. He'd had 11 years of being cataloged. It didn't usually feel like this. "You're generating significant thermal output," she said. "Sweating, yeah." He opened his kit, the emergency maintenance kit he'd had the presence of mind to grab from the supply cache on sub-level 4 during their run, a habit so ingrained in him that he'd done it without thinking, and found the chemical sealant. It was designed for lattice joint repair on minor structural damage. Not the same compound the Spire's engineering teams used, but functionally similar, maintenance grade. It would hold. "I have observed humans perspire before," she said. "I was not aware the volume could be this. It's the heat I'm regulating." He crossed to her. "This is going to feel cold." The sealant runs about 15 degrees below ambient. He met her eyes, checking. May I? The formality seemed to land on her in a way he couldn't quite read. She inclined her head, precise, deliberate. And he crouched beside her exposed shoulder and began applying the sealant in clean, careful strokes along the fracture line. The compound was thick and adhesive, and it took concentration to get the coverage even across the irregular crack. He focused on the work. She focused on him. Your body heat, she said after a moment, not in the tone of conversation but in the tone of someone narrating an observation, is continuous, constant. It does not fluctuate with activity the way our thermal emissions do. Core temperature stays pretty stable, yeah. 98.6 on the Fahrenheit scale, give or take. He worked the sealant into the deeper section of the crack. You're going to feel this pulling when it sets. It's normal. Don't try to move the joint until it cures. About 20 minutes. You are not afraid, she said. It was not a question. He looked up at her. Her face was very close in the cramped alcove, the amber light catching the planes of her silver features. And her eyes were doing that thing where they tracked too much, saw too much, processed him like a document. I'm extremely afraid, he said. I've been afraid since I dropped through that grate. I'm just used to working while afraid. Humans get a lot of practice. She processed this. He could actually see her processing it. A quality of stillness that preceded Siderian cognition, the way silence preceded speech. Siderians do not experience fear as a sustained state, she said. We calculate risk. We assign probability. We respond to incoming data. But the sustained biochemical condition you describe, operating through continuous threat response, she paused. This is what you mean by resilience, more or less. I have always understood resilience as an architectural quality, she said. Structural integrity under load. I did not understand it as a... She stopped. Something moved behind her amber eyes. A recalibration. A practice. Milo finished the sealant line and sat back on his heels, still close. The alcove didn't give him much choice about proximity, and he was aware of that. Aware of her thermal sensitivity. The way she had gone very still in the way things went still when they were attending to something they couldn't fully name. How long have you known about the coup? She asked. He held her gaze. 3 weeks. The silence that followed was the particular silence of a queen who had just received information she was deciding how to process, without fracturing herself on it. Tell me, she said. The subcom station at Junction 19 was a relic, a maintenance communication relay installed during the Spire's original construction and never upgraded, because the High Council had not considered it strategically significant. Milo had used it for 11 years to file work orders, schedule duct inspections, and twice to report gas leaks that the Council's automated systems had missed. Today he was using it to discover that the queen he'd just bled for was already officially dead. The broadcast was on the Imperial Channel, cycling on automatic in Princess Vala's voice, warm, melodic, carrying the particular resonance of Siderian speech calibrated for public consumption. The silver skin of the queen's face in this particular light was unreadable to most humans. Milo had spent 11 years learning to read Siderians in the same way you learn to read any complex system, by paying attention to the small things, the micro variations in tone and posture, the things the species itself didn't know it was broadcasting. Lyrina was perfectly still. That was how he knew. Accidental death, she said, when the broadcast completed its third cycle. Her voice was the same as it always was, crystalline, controlled. But something in the harmonic register had dropped a fraction. Something structural had shifted. She announced it before the guards had even completed the action. She was confident in them, Milo said. She planned it precisely. Lyrina's amber eyes moved to him. 3 weeks ago, you said 3 weeks. I was in Subduct 7, above the Cobalt Guard's private briefing chamber. The Spire's plumbing carries vibration a long way. I wasn't listening deliberately. I was repairing a coolant line. He met her gaze steadily. I heard enough. Guard movement schedules, the ritual timing, Varric's voice, and another voice I recognized. He paused. Princess Vala's. And you went to the council. 4 times. Level 1 liaison, Level 2, the sub-chamberlain, and finally the third keeper's office. He kept his voice even. I was a Level 4 soft body filing an alert about a coup against the ruling sovereign. They were very polite about not believing me. The third keeper's office said, and I have this in writing if we survive and you want to read it. that human maintenance workers were not equipped to correctly interpret high-level political communications, and that what I had likely overheard was a security drill. The silence that followed this was different from the previous silence. It had edges. "So you prepared alone," she said. "I calculated when the polishing hour would coincide with your most reduced guard rotation. I rerouted a thermal wash unit to the duct above Dias 4. I memorized the stress points of standard Cobalt Guard armor from the maintenance records. They have to file structural reports after every combat exercise, and maintenance gets copies to schedule repair rotations." He looked at her. "I didn't know if I could do it. I knew I had to try." Lyrina was looking at him with that cataloging attention again, but it was different from how it had been in the alcove, less clinical. More something he didn't have a word for. "You went to them 4 times, she said. "They dismissed you 4 times, and you came anyway. You were going to die. I am your sovereign. We are not—" She stopped. There was a Siderian phrase, he knew, for the untranslatable concept of not of reciprocal obligation, a technical term for asymmetric hierarchical bonds. She didn't finish it. "I did not know your name until 20 minutes ago." "I know," Milo said. "That's not really the point." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned back to the console and began interfacing with the subcom's secondary functions, one-handed, with an efficiency that said she had spent her life learning to make use of whatever was available. "We need to reach the main broadcast array," she said. "The Imperial channel can be overridden from the summit antenna relay. I can transmit a counter-broadcast from there. Proof of life, proof of treason, evidence of the Council's complicity. 200 stories of exterior service ladder," Milo said. He did the calculation she was already doing. "Siderians can't use it. Weight tolerance per rung is 120 kilograms. "No," she agreed. "They cannot." Her eyes met his. He understood what she was asking before she asked it. "Right," he said. "Let's move before the sealant fully sets." They were 2 junctions from the exterior ladder access when the 3 guards found them. Milo heard them first, the specific resonant footfall of Siderian combat weight in the Marrow's acoustics, the sound carrying off the pipe walls in the way heavy things moved differently from the maintenance crew's lighter tread. He pulled Lyrina back against the pipe housing and put his hand up. 2 fingers, 2 corridors, 3 contacts. She understood immediately. She was learning his signals, which struck him briefly as extraordinary. The guards came in fast, which meant Varric had recalculated his approach, sending lighter detachments into the Marrow rather than trying to force heavy units through the heat tolerance threshold. Smart. The 3 guards were secondary class rather than Cobalt, lighter armored, built for speed rather than impact. They hit the junction from 2 angles. Milo had 3 bursts left in the cryotank. He used 2 of them carefully, targeting the knee joints on the first guard and the shoulder assembly on the second, following each burst with the wrench with the mechanical precision of someone who had done this enough times tonight that the geometry was becoming automatic, which was a thought he filed away to feel complicated about later. The 3rd guard got past him. The glass steel blade caught his forearm on the outer edge. The guard's swing aimed for his weapon arm, and Milo's reflexive pull brought the blade along the outside of his forearm rather than through it. A significant difference, the difference between dead and functional, but the cut was deep. He felt it as a line of heat, not pain, the way bad injuries always presented first. The body buying time before it told you the truth about what had happened. He put the guard down with the last cryoburst and the wrench and stood for a moment in the aftermath, breathing, taking inventory. The Queen was at his side before he processed that she'd moved. Her amber eyes were on his forearm. Her expression was not the expression of someone observing an injury. It was something else entirely. "It's fine," he said. "You are losing—" She stopped. Her eyes tracked the blood running down his forearm, and then she went very still in the specific way she went still when something had disrupted her processing. "It is slowing. Yeah, it clots." He pulled a pressure wrap from the kit with his good hand, began applying it one-handed. "Blood clots. Platelets aggregate at the wound site. Fibrin threads form. It stops. It stops." She said it the way someone said a thing they needed to hear twice to believe. Her eyes had not moved from his forearm. "It leaves a scar. Doesn't go back to what it was, but the bleeding stops and the skin closes. Takes a few days." He finished the wrap, tested the tension. "We don't have repair shops. We just do it ourselves, internally." A Siderian with a ruptured mercury line. She stopped again. He'd read about this in the Spire's maintenance manuals, the sections covering Siderian industrial accidents. An internal rupture of the mercury circulatory system was effectively unsurvivable without immediate surgical intervention. There was no natural mechanism for it to stop. There is no internal arrest. There is only intervention or termination. I know, Milo said quietly. I've read the emergency protocols. She was looking at him now with something that was not cataloging and not calculation and not the operational assessment of a sovereign evaluating an asset. He recognized the look, suddenly, because he'd seen it on people's faces before, standing at the edge of something they hadn't known was there. He said gently, "We need to move." She made a small sound. Not quite agreement, not quite anything that translated, and fell in beside him. But her eyes went to his wrapped forearm once more before they rounded the junction, and stayed there a beat longer than any tactical assessment required. Tally, he noted to himself. 8 down, 4 remaining. The ascent was a vertical nightmare of carbon-reinforced polymer. It was a utilitarian structure. Carbon-reinforced polymer rungs anchored to the Spire's outer hull, rated for maintenance loads, exposed to the upper atmosphere's wind shear at the higher altitudes. Milo had been on it twice before. Both times in daylight, both times for antenna calibration work. And both times he had thought privately that it was the kind of thing that made a person very aware of being a small biological entity on the outside of a very large building. It was currently night. The Spire rose 200 stories above them, the summit's broadcast array a lit cluster against the dark sky, and the wind was running cold and lateral at this altitude. "I'm going to secure you to my back with the work belt," Milo said. He was already unbuckling it, the heavy-duty tool belt that had lived at his waist for 11 years, reinforced webbing rated for 200 kilograms of equipment load. "It's going to be uncomfortable." Lyrena regarded the latter with an expression he was beginning to recognize as her version of accepting an operational necessity without enthusiasm. "Your injured arm is my left. I lead with my right on the ascent." He checked the belt's quick releases, found them solid. "I need you to keep your weight centered. Don't try to compensate for my movement. Let me carry the positioning." "I understand weight distribution," she said, with a dryness that surprised him. "Right," he smiled despite himself, which was probably not the appropriate emotional register for this situation. "Ready?" He secured her to his back. The logistics of it were awkward and close, and involved a degree of physical proximity that neither of them commented on, because they were both being very professional and took the first rung. The ascent was brutal in the honest way that physical labor was honest. It made no allowances and kept no secrets. His injured forearms screamed at him on every grip. His shoulders, already exhausted from the fighting and the carrying and the tunnels, informed him in clear terms that they had opinions about this. The wind pressed at him laterally, testing, and at every third or fourth rung, he had to pause and let a gust pass before his footing was reliable again. Lyrena was silent on his back. She was managing her own weight with a precision that he could feel. The small deliberate shifts of her center of mass to stay balanced against his movement, rather than adding to the load. She understood the mechanics of it immediately and executed it without being asked. And he found himself deeply grateful for that. He was 40 stories up before she spoke. "Your breathing has changed." Her voice was close to his ear, the crystalline resonance muted here, almost private. "I'm working hard," he said. "No, it is different from effort breathing. You are managing pain." He considered lying, decided against it. "The arm, it's fine. I've done worse. You've climbed 200 stories of exterior ladder with a deep laceration before?" "Different kind of worse." He took the next rung, the next. "I fell off a scaffold on sub-level 32, 3rd year here. Broke 2 ribs and my right hand. Finished the inspection before I went to medical because the coolant system I was checking had a fault that would have gone critical overnight." He paused on a rung to let another gust pass. "Point being, I can work through it." Her arms tightened slightly around his shoulders, not a grip change for positioning. Something else. "Milo," she said. His name in her voice, with that crystalline resonance, was a thing he was going to remember. "When this is over, when the broadcast is made and the coup is broken," she paused, "you will be given whatever you ask for." He climbed for a moment in silence. "I'd like the infrastructure liaison's office to process maintenance requests within a standard work cycle," he said. The sound she made against his shoulder, half resonance, half something warmer, was unmistakably a laugh. He climbed. The summit platform was a functional space, not a ceremonial one. Relay housings, antenna mounts, the broad magnetic panels of the broadcast array itself, all of it bathed in the cold white light of the upper atmosphere. Milo pulled himself over the final rung and stood on solid footing for the first time in what felt like a geological age. Lungs working hard, arms sending clear signals about its opinions. He set Lyrina down. She steadied herself against the antenna housing, assessed the array with her one functional arm and the absolute focus of a sovereign who had a job to do and was going to do it. Then the maintenance access door at the summit's far end opened, and Commander Varric walked through it with 3 guards at his back. Milo counted his assets. 1 cryoburst remaining, 1 hammer wrench, a forearm that was functioning but not happy about it, and the profound disadvantage of being a single human at the summit of a 200-story building, facing 4 Siderian combatants after the longest night of his life. He ran the numbers the way he had always run numbers, not to find the answer he wanted, but to find the answer that was there. He found it. It was not comfortable. He was going to need the acid. The industrial cleaning solution in the maintenance kit was cataloged as a grade 5 caustic agent, designed for removing mineral scale from heat exchanger surfaces. It was not designed for use on Siderian facial lattice. There was no protocol for this. He was operating entirely outside any manual he'd ever read. Varric raised his blade and walked toward him with that particular Siderian calm, the flat amber eyes already calculating the angles of dispatch. "You've been remarkable," Varric said. "For a soft body." "Thank you," Milo said. "I've been working on it." He threw the acid, not the whole container, a controlled arc, angled for the face, a maintenance worker's throw, honed by 11 years of managing hazardous compounds in confined spaces. The grade 5 solution hit Varric's faceplate and did to living metallic lattice what it did to mineral scale. It found the microseams, the grain boundaries, the places where the alloy was most vulnerable to chemical attack, and it went to work. Varric made a sound Milo had never heard a Siderian make. He dropped his blade. His hands went to his face. Milo was already past him, turning to the 3 remaining guards with the hammer wrench and the single cryoburst, and the desperation of a man who had climbed 200 stories for this moment and was not going to let it go to nothing. He used the cryoburst on Guard 11's knee and dropped her with the wrench. Guard 10 got the wrench to the elbow joint and then the floor edge. The summit platform had a low magnetic barrier rim, not a wall, and Guard 10 went over it with a resonant crash that Milo did not look at. Guard 12 got the full weight of the magnetic floor buffer motor housing that he'd unbolted from the maintenance panel in the 3 seconds of chaos Varric's incapacitation had bought him, and went the same way. Varric was on his knees, the acid still working at his faceplate, the perfect architecture of his face dissolving in micro increments. He reached for his fallen blade. Milo put his foot on it. "It's over," he said. He was breathing very hard. He was bleeding again from the forearm. He realized distantly, shaking, the full body tremor of adrenaline and exhaustion, and the sheer physiological truth of what a human body did when it had been running at maximum for 3 hours and had finally stopped. "It's over, Varric." Varric looked up at him. The amber eyes, behind the ruined faceplate, flickered once and went dark as the acid reached the processing core. "She will never trust a guard again," he managed. A final rasp of static before his lattice collapsed. "No," Milo agreed. 12 dead, 0 remaining. The High Council chamber was exactly as cold as it always was. The ambient temperature maintained at a precise 20 degrees Celsius, optimal for Siderian cognitive function and deeply uncomfortable for humans in the long term. Milo had sat through 3 council proceedings in 11 years as a witness to maintenance incident reports. He had never sat in the first tier. He was sitting in the first tier now because Queen Lyrina had told the Chamberlain that was where he would sit, and the Chamberlain had not found the internal architecture to argue with her. The proceedings were efficient. Siderians were always efficient. Princess Vala had been placed in state custody within 6 hours of the broadcast. The High Council members who had received and ignored Milo's 4 warnings had filed voluntary recusal requests within 10. which was either genuine contrition or the recognition that the sovereign they'd failed was notably still alive, and had very specific knowledge of who had told her maintenance workers' warnings were beneath their consideration. Commander Varick's remains were being analyzed for treachery, his ruined core providing no further data. The Cobalt Guard as an institution was suspended pending full architectural review. The throne room where Lorena now sat, re-armored, repaired, the shoulder plate restored by the Spire's master engineers to a finish that was technically perfect, was full of the silver and chrome of the Siderian court, the resonant harmonics of 100 conversations layering over each other in the way of a species who made music with their speech, whether they intended to or not. She was not looking at any of them. Milo became aware of her gaze, the way you became aware of warmth. Gradually, and then all at once. He was sitting with his wrapped arm resting on his knee, the bandage changed and clean, his coveralls replaced with the Spire's staff formal wear. A dark utility suit that fit him reasonably well and which he was going to return as soon as this was over, because it wasn't his, and he was very aware of the category error of wearing a Spire uniform when he was a maintenance worker. She was looking at him the way she had looked at his clotting blood on sub-level 4, like something she had not expected to find in the world. He met her gaze, the amber eyes with their structural pupils and their Siderian depth, were doing something he had been trying to name since the marrow, since the alcove, since the ladder, since the summit platform, where she had broadcast the truth to an empire while he stood bleeding behind her. Not cataloging, not calculating, something that did not have a Siderian technical term, because it was not, he thought, a technical experience. She held his gaze for a long moment, across the full width of the throne room, through the silver crowd. Then she looked away, because she was a queen in a court, and there were things that required her attention. And she turned back to the business of being sovereign with the same controlled precision she brought to everything. But the Chamberlain, when he came to tell Milo the audience was concluded, informed him also, with a careful neutrality that suggested this was not a normal administrative message, that his Level 4 maintenance contract had been updated. He was, as of this morning, Level 4, Special Advisor, Infrastructure and Systems. The post had never existed before. The Chamberlain's expression suggested it had been created in the last 3 hours. Milo looked across the throne room one more time. Lorena was receiving a delegation of amber-ranked advisors, her posture precise, her voice carrying that crystalline authority. She was not looking at him, except that she was. Just briefly, from the corner of those unpupilled eyes, a glance that lasted less than a second and said something that 11 years in the Spire had not given him the vocabulary for, but which his body understood without translation. The way warmth was understood, or the particular quality of a current that wanted to move toward something and was not yet ready to name the direction. He smiled, small and private, and looked at his hands. They were bandaged and bruised and smudged with grease that hadn't fully washed out, and he was sitting in the first tier of the High Council chamber in a borrowed suit, and he had no idea what came next.